Tim from Washington, who has a question specifically for Secular Spirit. Why don't we just let him ask? So Tim, you're live on Truth Wanted. What do you want to say?
How are you guys? So first of all, I want to say, Secular Spirit, I loved your definition of hell and your description of hell. And before we get going into my question, what's interesting is that the early Christians thought of hell like the Jews did, which is Sheol and eternal punishment. It wasn't until Dante came that we actually got our current version of hell. But that's an aside. But really, Secular Spirit, what I wanted to know is, over the last, few weeks, I've been watching videos and hearing about how Muslims in the United States and Canada are much more accepting of the LGBTQIA plus community than are the Christian evangelicals. And what I wanted to know from you is, do you think Islam is more accepting in the Western world of the LGBTQIA community than they would be in, say, Iraq or Iran or any of the other Islam states?
Thank you for the excellent question, Tim. And I would say that Muslims in the West in general, or in countries, if you want to specify, that are generally more accepting of LGBTQ people, are definitely more accepting and more tolerant. And I think there's two reasons for that. One of them is cynical. I'll start with the positive one first. I think the main difference is that a lot of people, when they come from the Muslim world, they've never really encountered someone from the LGBTQ community, because a lot of people are closeted, a lot of people hide it, it's very stigmatized, there's a lot of shame around it. They might know people in their families, in their personal lives who are, but they just wouldn't know it. And when it is revealed, then there's a very big stigma that comes with it. And because of that, there's a lot of ignorance and irrationality around it. I can speak for myself. When I was living in Dubai, growing up in the United Arab Emirates, I was very homophobic. And then when I came here to Canada and I actually started meeting, like I had a friend who identified as gay, and I learned more about him and his life, and I saw, that they aren't these monsters that I believed they were. I saw that they aren't these repugnant creatures that I believed they were. And so I think the key thing is, when people are living in the West, when they're surrounded by people of all these different identities, faiths, sexual orientations, they realize they're not horrible people and they're just humans like us. And that makes such a big difference. Now, the second reason, which is cynical, is there might be Muslims that behave on the surface, or maybe even outwardly, when they're dealing with someone, say a coworker, for example. They will behave in a tolerant way. They'll be friendly with them, but inside they'll be thinking the same things that more bigoted, intolerant Muslims are thinking, where they are repulsed by them, but they want to fit in. So that's a cynical perspective. But overall, I would say yes, definitely a big difference with Muslims in the West.
Nice. I like that, because frankly, I mean, I grew up a Mormon and was an evangelical Christian and was also gay. And so I really had a lot of internal homophobia during all of that, and even went through conversion therapy, and it was tough for me. And I'm going to be 59 in April, and I was married. I have a child, some grandchildren, and when I came out again at 38, it was tough for me, because it was like I really thought I loved God, and then when I realized that God wasn't changing me, and then even more, then I realized that I am actually an atheist who believes that God does not exist. He is a myth like Odin or Osiris or any of the others. And once I realized that, I was like, wow, so people hate because of a myth. We all hate because we believe this myth to be the end all be all of who we are.
It's pretty upsetting, eh?
It is really, because I was one of those. I was a part of that. I taught gay guys how to not be gay. I was a member of, I don't know if you remember this, MD, or secular, the Exodus Ministries. I was a part of Exodus Ministries and actually taught classes by Andrew Comiskey and the Living Waters series or classes of how to fight your same-sex attractions. I was one of those, and it is one of the most horrific times in my life because it did affect me mentally and even physically because of the fact that I believed what the church was telling me.
Yeah, it sounds horrible. Like, I don't know. This is the thing that still gets me is the amount of harm that's done because people believe in something that's untrue.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we want to tie it back to the earlier caller, McMichael, who was asking about hell and butt plugs, this is where the repercussions of teaching your children to fear hell, because that's what happens when you teach hell. You're teaching fear, and I think there's a temptation from parents to use it as a tool of control, because if you're not around all the time as a parent, well, what's a quick, easy solution to that? Just tell them God's watching you all the time, and you better not do something bad because you're going to go to hell. It keeps your kids obedient, but then it can have all of these unintended consequences when, again, to use that example I used earlier, which is a real life example of so many people, is when you start realizing that your sexual orientation is not one that fits what your parents approve of, what your community approves of, and then you're instilling that shame, that hatred, just because you as a parent want to have that little semblance of control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will tell you that I remember as far back as 5 years old having crushes on some boys on television. I felt like I could not tell my mother. And it's not because she was ever overtly homophobic or anything, but because when we were watching shows, she would say, "Oh, isn't she pretty? Don't you think she's cute?" And it was like, no, I actually think that the Partridge Family drummer is cute. I like Chris Partridge. I think I want to kiss him. And I was 5 years old, and I remember this. I remember thinking that Peter Brady was really cute. And I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. But I couldn't say it to my parents because they weren't overtly homophobic. I'm going to say this. They were simply societally heterocentric.
Yeah. Systematic homophobia.
I don't even think it was thematic homophobia. I think that it was literally societal heterocentric. Because I was a boy, I should like this girl.
Right.
And so it wasn't like, who do you think? Do you like this person or anything like that? So yes. And that's what hurt me as a child. because I could not actually express who I was. But it was worse when I had to suppress who I was in my 20s and 30s because the church told me I had to go straight. And I met and married this wonderful woman. We had a great marriage, but it was not fulfilling sexually for me because I was performing an act outside of my nature, right? And but when I came out, when I divorced her and came out a second time, it was like so uplifting to me. I felt so much lighter. I was 38 when that happened, and it was amazing that I felt so free to be who I was when I suppressed myself and actually I lived under a rain cloud with thunder and lightning the entire time I was married, no matter how happy she made me in moments.
And, Tim, the chat on YouTube is going wild for you right now. They are loving you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this with us, Tim.
Oh, well, thank you. That's kind of cool. I'm glad. I really want people to know that the church hurts people, but people can get better by just admitting who they are and loving who they are and embracing who they are. And and I'm really glad that even if it is your cynical view, secular, of how Islam responds in the Western world, at least they respond positively. While their insides may be cringing, their outsides show acceptance. And that's what's important.
Well said. Yeah, and I think with each subsequent generation, I think even if it started off as a pretense, it carries over, and as it becomes more accepted and just seen in society, it will definitely change.
Yeah.
Tim, we've got to move on. It was a great call. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you so much,
Tim.
And
sharing your story.